I often say then that the destiny of the white child, by the very nature of the racial status quo today, is conservative. And the destiny of the black child, based on the same racial status quo, by its very nature, must be what? Revolutionary. It's got to be. In other words, the whites who have all of the money and have all of the power, military advantage, economic advantage, social advantage, cultural advantage, all of the other advantages we talk about, they must be educated to maintain and advance those advantages. Therefore, their education is what? Fundamentally conservative, to hold on to what they got. You understand? That's why you can't give your children the same education as white children. They're not in the same place. What are they conserving? Their deprivation? Yeah. And in a sense, we are being educated to conserve our deprivation and to perpetuate our oppression. When you go around this world and you tell me every African nation that you visit, whether it is in the Caribbean, Central or South America, or on the African continent itself, you see African people at the bottom of social, economic, and other ladders. Even in their own countries, other groups are stacked on top of them, one right after the other. The same thing that Marcus Garvey saw when he moved around the world. How can you say your children must have the same education as a white child? When you tell me that the wealth of the world is located on the African continent and located in the lands of non-whites, when you tell me that Japan, which has no natural resources at all, and yet is seen as one of the richest and most powerful nations on earth, that you want your children to have the same education, you have to be out of your minds. Some of you sit here and you innocently talk about, I want to be equal. That's all I want. I want to be equal. Do you know what? That's a revolutionary statement, you know that. A lot of people don't recognize that. They think they're non-revolutionary, you know. They think revolutionaries are people who want to shoot and fight. And so now we just wanted everybody to be the same. Do you know what you're saying? Do you know the tremendous amount of transference of wealth that must take place for black folk to be equal with white folk? Yeah. The tremendous control over resources, the tremendous ownership of real estate in this country, the real ownership of the means of production. Are you really talking about equality? You can't be. And so if you start to realize what you're saying when you say that you just want to be equal and you want all people to be the same, you'd realize that you are a revolutionary and you're making a revolutionary statement. Because for black people to be equal in this country will call for a major reconstruction and a major reorganization of this nation. You have to understand that. You know, in New York, they're asking blacks who are fighting the Jews in Crown Heights, how are we going to reduce racial tension? You know, and they keep pushing them. And I wish they would ask me that. I'm not here to reduce racial tension. I'm here to increase it.
What is good, my people? We are live back again with another live broadcast on the forecast. Shouts out to everybody that's out there tonight. I appreciate y'all for listening. Um, and yeah, much love to all of y'all. Uh, yeah, today I'm gonna go back with I'm gonna continue on with the Black History lessons, and like always. if somebody has an issue or you want to come up to add on, or if I left something out, or if I got something wrong, or whatever the case may be, yeah, there is the link in there, and you are welcome to come on here, for whatever the case may be. All right. So just so we not on here super long today, um, now we're not gonna get started with that, but all right, let's matter of fact, let's go ahead and just go ahead and get started. All right. Now, some of us do in fact need somebody white to tell us what we should already know, right? But one of the issues here is like so let me play this Neanderthal chick here.
People in this country who are proud racists, who are thinking back to time, proud racist country who are I'm out. The people in this country who are proud racists, who are thinking back to times of the Confederacy and segregation with fondness and the idea that that is America. Those people have a better understanding of American history than the liberals sitting around saying this is not who we are. And I know you're not going to like that, but it's really fucking smart. And I can say that because I'm not the person who said it. One of my friends said it at dinner, and I was like, oh, to sit in a country that exists because of the mass murder of the people that already lived on this land, the relocation of the people who survived, the trafficking of human beings based off the color of their skin from another continent to this country, where then they were forcibly enslaved, and all of the capital that came out of their labor was taken by a couple of members of the elite class, a practice that has many analogs to this day, because when the practice of slavery was abolished, there were carve-outs for labor in prisons that is technically supposed to only be following the conviction of a crime. Not that that makes it so much better, but in practice is used for people in immigration detention right now, is used for people who are held in pretrial detention.
Now, like I said, we're gonna touch on some of this stuff. This is just to, I guess, give people time to get in here really now. And this is the thing that I be trying to tell y'all, because the one thing that black people do, we're gonna do some explaining, right? It's like we like, well, if they just understand, then they'll change their ways. No, we are the ones who actually need the education, right? We think racist and all that stuff is a slur, when in fact we should probably learn how to practice that. Now, we don't have the same nature as the Neanderthal. Who's They are the ones who went around trying to take and steal and all of that type of stuff from everybody. Nobody is saying that, but it is important for us to put ourselves, who we are, what we represent, our families, and our structure first. And that is the most important thing. Shouts out to Matron. Appreciate you coming through, Matron. Make sure y'all subscribe to Matron channel. She be live every Tuesday and Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, at 9 o'clock my time. So yeah, like, she reading a crazy book right now that'll show you how they think. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm trying to give you a glimpse of it from our perspective, but I mean, if you listen to what you read now, like, but and I'll play because I want you to understand
Who
only
are
this part.
thinking back to times of the Confederacy and segregation with fondness and the idea that that is America. Those people have a better understanding of American history than the liberals sitting around saying this is not who we are. And I know you're not going to like that, but it's really fucking smart. And I can say that because I'm not the person who said it. One of my friends said it.
Right, they have a better understanding about all of this stuff. So when you look at me and be like, "Oh, that's racist. That's this. That's that." That's us not having a fundamental understanding, right? And part of probably maybe a major reason why we have been enslaved 3 or 4 times in the last 1,000 years, right? Because we feel like, well, if we just explain everything to everybody, people will be like, no, like, they won't put themselves first. They'll put everybody on the equal playing field, right? We want to be at the top, but have everybody stand on our shoulders. But if they're standing on your shoulders, they're still over you. You know what I'm saying? They're still standing above you at the top. You know what I'm saying? Even if you pulled them up the mountain yourself by their bootstraps, right? It's just a lack of fundamental
are
understanding.
held in pretrial detention, that the people that are in those situations remain overwhelmingly members of the racial groups that were originally
So we're
enslaved
gonna
or
talk about
subjugated in
the
this
3/5 compromise and all of that stuff, because we're gonna go into the history portion
country, to
today.
sit in a country that oversaw the Vietnam.
All right. So we don't need a Neanderthal chick here to tell us this. Um. Okay. So, and this sister here, she didn't, and I get it.
It's erased because it doesn't fit the
She's
symbolic
very good at
we're
a
taught.
historical
And when
thing.
you erase that, you erase how intentional colonization.
Now here she is trying to be like, hey, well, although the Mexican, because we trying to have this equality thing, but we hold everybody up with us. You know what I'm saying? She's like, well, let's teach about their history. No, I'm not going to do that. You know what I'm saying? We looking at history from a black perspective, how it affects us, and how we can look at it for ourselves today and moving forward. Because at the end of the day, this is the things you're going to get.
Really was. But once you understand it, a lot of American history starts making more sense. Land theft, broken treaties, forced removals. Why survival itself was framed as resistance, because it always was.
So why? And that always like, why do we want to be a part of that so bad? I don't understand. What is the goal? Right? What are you trying to do? Like, why? If we know it's all of these things, why do we want to be a part of it anyway? I never understood that. Like, if I don't know what it is, I can understand. Like, hey, this isn't fair. I want to be treated right. But now that I have an understanding, I know that we are the only group that doesn't understand it, like where you always gonna like I'm not gonna treat every child in the neighborhood the same as I treat my child in particular. Right, but no, we're gonna be like, well, no, I'm gonna stand up for the little Neanderthal boy, the little Neanderthal girl, the Mexican boy, you know what I'm saying, and my child. Even though the Mexican boy jumped in front of the Neanderthal white girl to save him from my child and punched him in the face or whatever. Anyway.
Knowing the difference doesn't lessen the harm. It actually tells the truth.
Okay, so I need to say this because a lot of people genuinely don't know. And honestly, I didn't either for a long time. Native Americans were enslaved. They were captured, they were forced into labor, and in many cases shipped far away from their homelands. But, and this part matters, it was not the same system as African chattel slavery.
And that's the very important part that matters, right? But we're going to hear Pocahontas over here, right?
Different logic, different structure, different end goal. Still violent, still dehumanizing, just built for a different purpose.
I'm not going to show the whole video. You can go to her page and watch the whole thing because it's 3 minutes long. And even though she got some things correct, there are still things that she got wrong. The main thing being that indigenous people did not experience chattel slavery, which is false. Now, I did a response video to her once before, where she tried to claim that Mexicans had this proximity to whiteness, even though we went through segregation. That Mexican
No, for some reason, we're going to, what?
Kids had better schools, better books, better education than Black kids did, which is completely incorrect. And after I respectfully corrected her and told her she probably shouldn't speak on histories that she wasn't familiar with the nuance, she blocked me from TikTok. But I'm not blocked.
So here she is telling her to, and while she's trying to speak on and compare herself to other Black people, right? But this is why it's important for you to understand your history so that fools can't sit there and gaslight you all day. Like, not that you should care, but the fact that we do care a lot is bothersome, to me. It's not what they say. You expect this from a mulatto group, or a Mexican.
Up from Instagram. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I told you then. Please start speaking on histories you don't know the nuance.
So I guess I probably should have waited to play this because we can get into one of the many, 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 many times they stabbed you up in the back up until like the election last week or last month or whenever it was. Right. But the point is, you should definitely know your history because while we deny our history, right? You see, they don't even
statue of
they don't even deny false history, right? They're not going to be like, oh, Columbus never made it to America. Actually, did you know that? Did you know? Or they're not going to do that to the psychopaths and the murderers and the rapists. They celebrate. You know what I'm saying? They're not going to downgrade them. You know.
A statue of Christopher Columbus has been placed on the grounds of the Eisenhower Executive Office building adjacent to the White House. It's the latest effort by President Donald Trump's administration to recognize the controversial explorer. The statue is a replica of one that was tossed into Baltimore's harbor in 2020 during Trump's first term at a time of nationwide protests against
They got it out the harbor when y'all weren't looking.
Trump
Y'all did all that protesting and they went and got it out the water.
endorses a traditional view of Columbus as a leader of the 1492 mission, seen as the unofficial beginning of European colonization in the Americas. But in recent years, Columbus has also been recognized as a primary example of Western Europe's conquest of the New World, its resources, and its native people.
Yeah, so as you see. All right.
The Trump administration is celebrating what it calls the original American hero as the U.S. nears its 250th birthday. President Trump installing a statue of Christopher Columbus just steps away from the White House. The 13-foot sculpture is a replica of the monument that was torn down and dumped into Baltimore's harbor
a replica.
in the 2020 riots. So, Steve, statue coming back. Going right there, just a stone's throw from the White House. Christopher Columbus, what do you think?
Well, very fitting for the 250th. Imagine if Columbus had a GPS. Instead of coming to North America, he would have ended up in India, and we wouldn't have had the American colonies and anything to celebrate today. So I stood on that.
Ain't that something? So they ain't gonna be like, oh yeah. It's like, because he was such a dumbass, he didn't know where he was going and got lost. Hey, we celebrate the death and destruction of these people. We was trying to go kill them people, and he ended up calling them Indians. So hey, let's celebrate. You know, we should do. And notice he said a stone's throw, because maybe that's what you should be throwing.
Jackie,
you know how they do be doing Trayvon Martin stuff, or even Emmett Till plaques and stuff, how they like to shoot it up every year. I'm just saying what they do, you know.
I like seeing statues go back up rather than be torn down, statues that commemorate moments in our great American history.
And even if you don't love everything about the statue, tearing it down doesn't erase
Not
the
everything.
history. I view statues
Just not the rape and the pillaging and the savage. You know, even he was charged or whatever, because even other Europeans was like, damn, you're pretty savage, except for the king, who was just as savage as him, who gave him more money and whatever he did after that, you know.
statues as a way, a learning, a teaching moment. I can take my kids to the statue. We can talk about the goods, the bads, everything in between, but I don't pull it down to try to erase it. I want to use these as teaching moments, and I like that that's hopefully what we're
So yeah, we definitely want to teach about history and the legacy that it leaves, right? And of course, if we not have, and look, I'm not going to get into the debates with y'all. Y'all can debate amongst yourselves about this topic, right? But I'm going to play this for you, right? About the legacy and stuff like that, about what just happened. And before I play it, like, understand this, they are going to pay for what they did. It's just a mentality, which I think is growing, but they are going to pay one way or another for what they have done. You know what I'm saying? And for you not to sell yourself short, right? If they want to say, well, 700,000 gave their lives in the Civil War as the reparations. Well, you know what? 12 million of us died. So you're a bit short on that number, right? You're going to have to go, what, 11.3 million more, right? That's what you're going to have to do. But first is like even the mentality, though, of like, what is the goal that we want? You know what I'm saying?
Here in the United States, Black history courses are being removed from school curricula.
By the way, if my bill was $120 and I paid like $17, what are they gonna do? Like when if I don't pay my bill, what are they gonna do? Right? So if they're saying this is what, or what I'm saying, we can come up with a compromise because we'll talk about some compromises in a second.
Schools are being mandated to stop teaching students about the truth of slavery, segregation, and racism in American history courses. Books about those topics are being banned in schools and public libraries. Museums, art centers, and other institutions whose budgets rely in any way on public funds are being prohibited from scheduling exhibitions and programs or from displaying materials promoting racial awareness or Black history. Much like the law that was put in place to regulate the punishment of the enslaved in Barbados, these policies are becoming a template for other governments as well as some private institutions.
So that is
All right, and my thing is, right, and we can have the conversation because like I'm down to have an honest conversation about it, not on one side or yeah, I mean, I'm on my side, but the rule is though, you can't just say African sold other African. You're gonna have to say who, what, when, where, how, and all. Not the whole thing, but at least who, right, and probably when and for how long, right? Because you can't just repeat it, right? Because I'm tired of all of them Neanderthal. I just be posting up stuff on the Black History stuff, and there's African sold other African. That's all you hear all day long, right? Now, feel how you feel about the reparations that they will pay, right?
Day of Remembrance of Victims.
And I still don't understand when other black people, even talk against it. Now I get it if you say, well, yeah, but this is how we're going to have to get it. But when black people talk against it, right? Even if they seem to be like, it's still, that's a red flag in itself. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a difference between like, hey, you know, I get it. It ain't begging or none of that stuff. You owe me, bro. Like, I don't care if I go to a job and they don't pay me, right? Am I begging to be like, yo, give me my check? Or am I legit to be like, yo, I'm taking whatever means necessary to go get my check, right? And listen, I never agree with it, but whatever you want to try, right? But even when Malcolm X was like, yo, we need to go to the UN and do such and such, why in the would they ever do that unless you force their hand, right? And I get it. You can use certain other things as leverage, right? But also at the same time, black people don't seem to understand leverage. We think like it's friendships and because like I said, we the ones that try to educate everybody when we need the education, right? We try to be fair and equal, but anyway.
At the United Nations yesterday, 123 countries voted yes and 3 voted no: the US, Israel, and Argentina. The resolution was brought by Ghana's president on behalf of all 54 African Union member states. It passed on the International Day of Remembrance of Victims of Slavery. It called the slave trade the most inhumane and enduring justice against humanity. At least 13 million African men, women, and children were abducted and sold over more than 400 years. The resolution called for
way more than 400 years, and no telling how many people. These are I need to emphasize this. I lose. It's no way that I can talk about everybody all the time and that I even see, let alone the ones I don't see. But do you know how many cases and stories that nobody will ever know about? That's crazy.
reparatory justice, a formal apology, compensation, rehabilitation, and guarantees it never happens again. The U.S. ambassador said Washington does not recognize a legal right to reparations for, quote, historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time they occurred. The UK, which abstained, said the same thing. The prohibitions on slavery had not yet been established in international law at the time of the slave trade. Let that sit. The argument is, it wasn't against the rules when we did it, so why should we pay for it now? The US ambassador also said that the UN exists to maintain.
By the way, yeah, kidnapping was illegal at the time. Like, and all the things that they was doing was illegal. But it's not even about all of that stuff because we understand, right, that murder, rape, and all that stuff. But we know European culture, like, yeah, they do that stuff to each other, right? Which is like why we want to be a part of that. But we know the deal, right?
International peace and security, and was not founded to advance narrow specific interests and agendas. Narrow interests, I guess, being 13 million people kidnapped across an ocean, 400 years, the economies of entire nations built on the labor of people in chains. And 52 countries, including Canada, the UK, France, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, Belgium, every EU member, countries that ran the slave trade, abstained. They simply neither voted yes nor no. Ghana's president said it best. All peoples of African descent have been waiting for this day. The truth cannot be buried. 123 countries agreed, and the countries that profited most from the slave trade either voted no or couldn't bring themselves to vote at all. The resolution isn't legally binding, but it puts something on the record that took 400 years to say out loud.
This video I am making.
Put it on the record as if 12 million people wasn't on the record, you know? Anyway, I don't know what to tell you here, y'all.
Well, incredible about this is that reparation would, at the low end, would cost us billions. At the middle would cost us trillions. And at the top end would cost us probably the entire economy's GDP.
Yeah, your entire economy, right? Because what is your entire economy based off? And still based off of. That's what we don't understand. It's still based off of.
And yet we have the UK's representative not say, this is ridiculous. All bad things have happened in the past. We can't have actions every time something wrong has happened on our watch. Instead of that, they say, actually, not a bad point. I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to abstain on this. How on earth could our country abstain with something which could literally wipe our economy out? Why haven't we got a problem?
Well, I'll tell you this, right? Because their excuse is, well, we are less than 10% of the population and have committed over 90% of the crimes against humanity. So imagine if we went around paying everybody, we'd be broke back in the caves, back in the dark ages. Well, you know, that's the things you get for trying to teach them how to take a bath, by the way. And I hope you learn that, or learn your lesson this time.
Prime Minister or a Foreign Secretary or a permanent secretary of the Foreign Office stand up and say, we are not abstaining on this issue. It is completely wrong. We are fighting for our people. We are not paying one penny. We are voting against. Who made that decision? Please, was it you, Yvette Cooper? Was it you, Starmer? Was it you? I don't know who it could be. Who could possibly have said we should abstain on an important issue which would affect? Don't worry about what's happening in Iran. This will be 1,000 Irans, right? So please, would somebody from the Labour Party explain to me how such a...
Yeah, well, Iran isn't even 1,000 Irans. But anyway.
Hi, sweetie, how are you doing? Welcome to my...
Let's see here. Anyway, I'm about to get to it. And I did this part while I know won't nobody here to say nothing, so...
Somebody who maybe had an ancestor 7 or 8 generations ago, long before they were a twinkle in their great-great-great-great-grandparents' eye. Why should they have to pay now for what an ancient ancestor did? Or why should they apologize for what an ancestor did centuries ago? Why do they still carry that burden?
Oh, it's not a burden at all.
And by the way, y'all better not say, oh, all I want is an apology. All I wanted to do is recognize what you did. all of that. You know what I'm saying? I don't want that at all. Who cares what they recognize or don't recognize? What they're going to recognize is those payments when they start coming out their checks. You know what I'm saying? And tell them they better not start missing no hours either. You ain't gonna do no explain. That's the only explanation, to be like, hey, you better go to work so you ain't short on my reparations payment that come out your check, boy. Anyway.
You are one of the beneficiary of that slave trade. So this is not a burden. You should be concerned, and you should pay, because you today are still benefiting from the greatest indignity to a human being, and that is the slave trade. And not only did you benefit during the slave trade and your country developed, but look at what it caused the developing world. During slavery, resources was used to build your country, build up your capacity. You were able to then become competitive. You were able to invest in mechanization, and developing countries like ours were left behind. So you should be very concerned, because you are a prime beneficiary of the exploits of slavery.
So put a figure on it, please, because it always comes down to the bottom line. How much should an individual taxpayer in a country like the UK be signing a check to a country like yours, Ghana?
Well, let's see. For 600 years, right? So 3 of them equals 1 of us. So it has to be 12 million, 13 million people. So like, if that, it at least got to be 39 million of them, right? Perpetual means forever. So let's put it like this: perpetual means forever. So y'all better not lose no hours, and teach your little Neanderthal kids how to work so they don't miss no hours when they grow up, and so y'all pass that lineage down for what, 400 years times 1600 years maybe. Yeah, all right, that's fair payment, I guess.
Well, it's easy to calculate. We can use the time value of money. You can look at the period of slavery and the contribution not the contribution, the extraction of wealth from countries like ours, and how it was utilized to build your society, build your country, create wealth in your country, and then add the time value of money, and you will get the value. There's a lot of research paper on this. A lot of universities would have done paper on this.
Right, they only been doing studies for like 45, 50, 60, 70 years. They've been doing the study. So I'm sure they have studied it by now.
Enough literature to tell us what that value is. But I want to say that it is not only the value, it is the loss of time. It is a loss of competitiveness. It is a loss of human dignity. It is a loss of our education system. It is a culture that we lost. It is all of this indignity that surrounded slavery that we must consider.
I just wonder, people will be wondering what, you explain that there are calculations, but are you able to say in what measure that would be? I mean, are we talking billions, millions?
Put it like this: the 3/5 compromise. How about that? We'll do the 1/3 compromise, right? For every three of us, then you know what I'm saying. For every 1 of us, you're gonna need three of y'all to pay this fine here. All right. So for every year, you're gonna have to do ×3, right? So just add that up.
What would you expect the payout to be, and over what period of time?
So it's paid up.
Well, you know, this year in Guyana, we commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Demerara Rebellion. And it took 200 years to get an apology from one of the families. I don't believe that
an apology
wait 200 years for reparative justice and for us to take this conversation forward. CARICOM would have set out a 10-point plan on what should constitute reparative justice and what should constitute reparation. And the calculation goes
Now, the issue on our behalf is what are we trying to accomplish, though? You know what I'm saying? Like, are we trying to feel equal into the society? Are we trying to be like, hey, let's catch up to what has been done so we can be equal in this society? Or are we trying to build our own infrastructure, our own stuff, right? To make our own rules, right? To be competitive in the world as far as manufacturing stuff, because if we're ever competitive, you already know what we would do, because we're not even competitive and we still drive them out of whatever it is they're doing, right? It's just the fact that they capitalize off of what we create, and they the one who turn it into products and monetize it, right? We do the singing and dancing and jumping and running and thinking and writing and all of these things, and they monetize it, right? So the problem is, especially with no matter where you are, what the hell is your goal for this, right? Is it to achieve some kind of equality that can never be, right? Or is it to educate ourselves and learn how to maintain a system that maintains you and your group, right? And you don't have to worry about all the other stuff, because you're a black person. You're gonna be like, hey, I love everybody, so you don't gotta worry about conquering everybody. But the thing you have to learn how to conquer is loving yourself the most first, and saying that, being okay with that. And if somebody call you racist, be like, thank you. Right? It means that we don't need education no more. And if you ever do that, then the whole world is going to shut down except for your world, And if you notice, every time we have our own stuff, other societies start collapsing and ours tend to start thriving. Right? But anyway.
Into billions for the region.
How far back, though, do we have to go on this? Because you make the point, we're talking exclusively here about Western
Until y'all
imperialism.
left out the caves. How about that?
To summarize it. But almost every civilization on the planet owes its existence and its prosperity almost always to crimes in the past, be they aggressive wars, be they different forms.
See, now this is a European. Not everybody does that. They ain't had a crazy African until damn Shaka Zulu. They was dancing and stuff before Shaka Zulu and stuff. You know what I'm saying? A person might scrape their knee in a war. You know what I'm saying? And then Shaka Zulu, which was on time. You know what I'm saying? Maybe he was sent as a prophet of his time, right? To be like, hey, I've never seen these pale faces, but don't trust them. Right? We can smell them a mile away. Anything that stink that bad, you should not trust it.
Forms of slavery involving different movements of population. You can go right back to the Greeks and the Romans. Why just target one particular era in history? Some would
notice that. Back to the Greeks and the Romans, back to that sick pedophilic culture that they have. You know what I'm saying? Of course, you go all the back to y'all. Now, if y'all had stayed in the caves and was Epsteining each other this whole time, then nobody would care. But the fact y'all came out and spread it across the world like a freaking virus, that's the problem.
say that's the arguments of political convenience. It's a handy handle to hang your argument on.
I think you're doing a great injustice to compare slavery with any other of the historical facts that you're mentioning.
I was including other forms of slavery. No, but I was including other examples of slavery as well.
To the indignity that slavery brought to people, that is the first thing. And I'll give you an example. Coming on to your program a few moments ago, you were speaking about net zero and climate justice. We are speaking about, the world is speaking today about climate justice and compensation and how we address the issues of climate change. And this is the problem. We live in a very unjust society. You know, we condemn completely the war in Ukraine. But if you look at the mobilization of resources in the war in Ukraine, in 2 years, you have mobilized more support for Ukraine than we have mobilized for Haiti for 60 years. You have mobilized more support for Ukraine than we have mobilized for Palestine for 20 years. You have mobilized more support for Ukraine in just 1.5 years than we mobilized to address the issue of hunger in Africa for 3 years. And that is the type of
300. 3 years. Anyway, millions of people died of starvation, and that's part of how BP became a corporation is British Petroleum, right? Millions of us had to starve to death, right? Let alone die in a war after those starved to death so there can be a British Petroleum.
Unjust way we have been dealing with these crises. And we are not going to tolerate the injustice that occurred during slavery to be compared with any other system. Slavery, we all agree, was the greatest injustice ever done to human beings. So we should not ever try to compare this to any other system.
No.
There is no other system that has created greater injustice than slavery and indignity to humankind and slavery.
President
taking
Darling, I
that long,
wanted
but
to
I
talk
don't
to you about another issue. In fact, you raise it there. Guyana discovered crude oil in 2015, and by some accounts, that makes your country.
All right. So I'm taking long, so let's go for it.
Speak up against it, you will.
And before we get into history, let's just play this here.
White guilt's okay.
Yeah, white guilt is definitely okay.
To all the white people who did actually learn the atrocious history that, we're a part of to the extent that we came from it, and that just by being born white, unless you educate yourself on these things to actively speak up against it, you will just inevitably support it, right? So to all the white people who did that research, did you self-harm? Did you find yourself self-harming or substance abuse, or especially if, you get the key words for these things in school.
And so if you did, right, then okay, good, right? You're paying your fair share, right? Because you said 700,000, but you said 13 million. But then it takes 3 of you to equal 1. So damn, y'all got a long way to go. I need a mathematician in the building here, right? But the math is pretty simple once we add it up, right? So, and the ones who haven't done enough research to do that, then go do some more research. Then that's all I could tell you, right? So,
the extent that we came from it, and that just by being born white, unless you educate yourself on these things to actively speak up against it, you will just inevitably support it, right? So to all the white people who did that research, did you self-harm? Did you find yourself self-harming or substance abuse, or especially if,
good start good start on the reparations conversation. All right, let's go to the Black History part. This is where we left off at, right? The
their funds,
brothers and sisters in Philadelphia.
We might be able to take care of the widows, that we might be able to provide some health care for the youth.
We can find mutual aid societies providing protection, providing funds for food, for education, libraries, homes that were founded for orphans of color who had nowhere to go, who couldn't be part of orphanages that served white people. All of these sorts of things, as at the same time they were fighting against slavery.
The very beginning, I mean, the Black church was everything to the African American. I mean, it was a place where we did our theology, of course, our politics. It was our conservatory of music. It was everything for the African American family and the African American child. The holistic kind of philosophy that undergirds the Black church comes out of our kind of collective struggle. And so we have to address and have had to address these kinds of issues collectively for some time.
Well, it's an important model because at the time,
okay, yeah, we gonna skip past this little
Court
part.
operators, clerks, stenographers, bookkeepers, and secretaries prepare for a routine day's work with their usual.
And then we'll see on future lessons, a lot of these Black mutual aid societies were popping up all over the place because we understood that we are all we got. And if nobody came to help us, then we would get no help. And they realized that they had to do what they had to do for themselves. And after they created their own individual mutual aid societies, they work with other societies in different areas. Like the brothers in Boston or the brothers in Rhode Island, like we talked about, worked with the brothers in Philadelphia. And like I said, next time we'll talk a little bit more about the AME church. But Black people knew that they had no choice, because while George Washington and them was having their convention to discuss the quote unquote Negro problem, they also feared white uprisings because they never treated their own justly anyway. For example, one of their original January 6 riots was known as Shays' Rebellion.
The Revolutionary War left American states in debt. To raise money, legislators raised taxes. This angered poor farmers and war veterans to the point where they formed a rebellion and almost caused a civil war in Massachusetts. Daniel Shays, a former captain in the Continental Army.
Look at that again. They not them enslaving and selling their children, but because they taxed them for stuff that they gave them. You know what I'm saying? Because they didn't get something for free, they rebelled.
Led the protest, which came to be known as Shays' Rebellion. In the summer of 1786, several thousand of Shays' followers prevented tax collection and used force to keep debtors out of prison. They headed to Springfield to seize weapons, intending to force the Boston legislature to change the law. Massachusetts residents were terrified. The legislature realized it was powerless. The Continental Army had been disbanded after the Revolutionary War, and the federal government had no money for new troops. Finally, wealthy merchants in Boston agreed to raise an army of over 4,000 militia to fight Shays' men.
These men were talking about forming a new country out there. There's no telling what might have happened. If Shays' Rebellion had flourished, if these guys had been able to grab all the guns and had arsenal and armed a big army, it would have been a very bad thing for the country.
Now, I won't get into the white on white crime thing, but you know, it's funny, right after rebelling because of having to pay taxes, now they wanted to do the same thing to the poor white people in America, which pissed them off. And even though people like Samuel Adams, who just 10 years earlier was one of the most famous rebels, now all of a sudden he was in power, he was completely against the rebels and felt they should be put to death. But like I said, man, I'm not going to get into that white. Now, it is white on white crime, right? And that's why they always be like, well, yeah, all the atrocities, because that's all they know. That's what they do. That's the Neanderthal mindset, right? And yeah, we see Shay's
Did you know that a farmer
they
led
was rebelling
uprising
from
in
day one,
Massachusetts almost brought America to its knees?
or
Let's dive
being
into Shays' Rebellion, a pivotal
disloyal
moment in
from day
American
one.
history that changed everything. In the mid-1780s, America was under they saw as
All right, so
unjust.
blah blah blah, right? But the truth is, right, and we see it in modern times, right? Because right, that's no different from what y'all talk about with the January Sixers, right? That was, Shays' Rebellion. And all the rednecks is like, oh no, Shays' Rebellion was no January 6th, but they are, well, I guess the liberals is trying to be like, no, I'm proud of that moment, but I am not proud of this moment. But that's all it was. You know what I'm saying? Europeans doing what they always do, right? It's the same thing. And he's like, oh, Daniel Shays' Rebellion. They was like, yo, they probably would have did the same thing to Donald Trump. And I guess that's what they comparing it. But yeah, it was basically that, you know what I'm saying? But we wasted time, so we gonna get back to it. We're gonna go to the next one. Of course, who a lot of people claim, because each colony was kind of doing its own 1700s. But this is where we pick up our lesson after their war, when Britain had to recognize America as its own nation. This is the part when they came up with their constitution. Now, they say they wanted a stronger central government with more control over the states, which at the time the states was pretty much seen as basically might as well be different countries. because, you know, each colony was kind of doing its own thing. But they wanted a central government to control it all. And so that's when they split up their power with the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of their government. And I'm not going to go into deep in all that stuff. And if you want to learn about, you know, their government and all of that stuff, I encourage you to do so, but you can learn that at any European course, so a regular American course. But anyway, when we looking at it from our perspective, right, here you have these hypocritical thugs who they call founding fathers, writing a document talking about all men are created equal when all of them own slaves, and it's probably slaves right there in the room with them.
It is possible to make the argument that Thomas Jefferson is the first person to truly articulate a theory of race in the United States. And in effect, he has to do so.
No, he was not.
He has said in the Declaration of Independence that we are all created equal.
By the way, and just as a famous one of them, good old Ben Franklin might have been the first MAGA. Well, I guess they was just MAG, you know, Make America Great. All right. Ben Franklin was one of the first popular ones that they called their fathers. And it's weird, though, that they call a bunch of, like, the original Epstein crew their fathers. You know what I'm saying? It's weird, you know?
Well, if in fact we're all created equal, and if in fact we're entitled to our liberty, then how can he possibly own 175 slaves and going up to about 225 slaves at the peak of his slaveholding?
In notes, Jefferson's words appeared to justify slavery at a time when many were admonishing the founding fathers for espousing freedom, while continuing to support a system of human bondage.
The problem that they had to figure out is, how can we promote liberty, freedom, democracy on the one hand, and a system of slavery and exploitation of peoples who are non-white on the other?
And the way you do that is to say, yeah, but you know, there's something different about these people. This whole business of inalienable rights, that's fine, but it only applies to certain people.
The moment when we become a nation is critical for our understanding of both American nationality and race. We accept the notion that all men are created equal, but then perhaps some of those people who are enslaved are not quite men. That is, we'll keep our ideas of American nationality, but we'll write certain people out of the human family.
Now, as for the Constitution, non-humans write you out the quote-unquote human family. The original document never actually mentioned the word slave one time. All right, and before we do that, right, because of course we already know this though, right? Were these retards,
And I think
idiots,
that
hypocrites?
in itself is a rebuke to those who say, well, the founders were just—
I would be shocked.
We didn't mean a word of what they said. And to some extent, of course, that's right. There's hypocrisy in any generation.
Yo, put it like this. I'd be telling them, right? If I didn't know I was talking about Neanderthals, I'd be shocked at the level of hypocrisy, because I'm like, how could you possibly?
And I think that in itself is a rebuke to those who say, well, the founders were just a bunch of hypocritical slave owners who didn't mean a word of what they said. I mean, to some extent, of course, that's right. There's hypocrisy
to some extent,
and greed and avarice and so on. But
now you see how when they do it, now everybody has our traits of still killing and destroying. Everybody does it, you know. Less than 10% of the population, probably like around 8 or 7% of the global population, but over 90, probably closer to 95% of the crimes against humanity, right? Because we can't forget about the Nisovans and all the other groups that have been created between the three, in my opinion, right? But so probably 93, 92% of them they have done.
Said. I mean, to some extent, of course, that's right. There's hypocrisy in any generation and greed and avarice and so on. But they did set down
in their foundational document a set of ideas that eventually led to the liberation of the very people they themselves had enslaved.
Would it be fair to say they were sincere? They had a blinkers on. In other words, I don't think they were hypocrites in the sense of they didn't mean it. They meant it, but hadn't realized what they were meaning.
And I think that in itself is.
They didn't realize it. They didn't know what they meant. So you mean to tell me all the stuff that y'all found y'all stuff on, they didn't even know what they was meaning when they was doing it? Is that what you're trying to say? So why celebrate fools who didn't even know what they meant to do? All right. So they was pretty stupid then, huh?
Here are the dark truths about the Founding Fathers' slavery, racism, and hypocrisy. Back in the 18th century, a time when America was taking shape, these men fought for freedom while owning slaves. They preached liberty but practiced bondage. How did they reconcile this contradiction? Let's unpack that.
They have a Neanderthal spirit.
George Washington, the reluctant slave owner.
Reluctant
George
slave
Washington,
owner.
the revered father of his country, led the American colonies to independence and served as the first president of the United States. Yet, beneath his heroic legacy lies a grim truth.
And be like, yo, you're a reluctant dog owner. Or you're a reluctant, because that's the way that they look at you, right? You were property, as we're about to discuss in a second.
Washington inherited his first slaves at the tender age of 11.
Oh, so he was groomed for this.
This inheritance marked the beginning
Seems to be a
of
cultural thing.
relationship with the institution of slavery. By the time of his death, Washington owned more than 300 slaves. His wealth and status were, in large part, built on
He begrudgingly owned 300 slaves. Begrudgingly.
acts of these individuals who toiled without freedom. Upon marrying Martha Custis, Washington's ties to slavery deepened. Martha brought her dowry slaves to their union, further entrenching the future president in the practice. One of the most poignant stories from Washington's life involves Ona Judge, a young enslaved woman who escaped from the Washington household. Washington's relentless pursuit of Judge after her escape reveals the stark contrast between his public image and private actions. Despite his efforts, Judge lived out her life in freedom, a testament to her courage and determination. In contradiction, he was a lifelong
So,
slaveholder.
if you didn't know,
Posed
they
very
look some damn hypocrites. There you go. Is it?
America's
Probably not.
secret? Thomas
Who knows?
Jefferson, third president of the United States and author of the Declaration of Independence, is America's golden boy. He's often admired for his moral integrity, mostly for penning these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He also wrote a lot more to bash slavery in the first draft of the Declaration that was removed. For example, he called it execrable commerce, an assemblage of horrors, and a cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberties. Modern Americans admire him for these words, for realizing the evils of what he called moral depravity and a hideous blot. And yet, Thomas Jefferson enslaved around 600 people in his lifetime, more than any other U.S. president. He hid them away.
Damn, George Washington slipping. He only had 300. And this is where I've been to. I've been to Monticello. It's a big ass estate, right? And he had the little chamber where he had the black woman, where he probably led to his bedroom where he can go rape her whenever he wanted to. Let's be real, right? And not just like Sally, just the ones that they liked, you know what I'm saying, at the time. And the good ones, right? The ones that were like, yes, sir.
At Monticello, out of sight of his guests. He refused to take them to Washington when he became president, choosing to hire white servants instead. He authorized regular beatings, even of children, the little boys who worked in the nail factory.
I'm sorry. Y'all have to remember, hire the white servants while leaving his um black slaves back at home. But listen to what he
U.S.
did.
president. He hid them away at Monticello, out of sight of his guests. He refused to take them to Washington when he became president, choosing to hire white servants instead. He authorized regular beatings, even of children, the little boys who worked in the nail factory he was so proud of. He was known to sell children south away from their families in order to teach them a lesson. In terrorem, Jefferson's words. Even after his death, Jefferson
Terrorism.
refused to emancipate the people.
They were terrorists, and they call them fathers. He said, "We are terrorists," in his own words.
In order to teach them a lesson. In terrorem, Jefferson's words. Even after his death, Jefferson refused to emancipate the people he enslaved. Not even Sally Hemings, with whom he had fathered 6 children, he also enslaved. So who was Jefferson really? America's golden boy or something?
Yeah, a piece of yeah. Well, we know, right? That's a good old TJ for you. But in order to be able to have this level of hypocrisy, right, to talk about freedom and all of this other stuff, you also you have to dehumanize, right, the actual ones who you have to dehumanize us. All right. He mentioned the word slave one time. But when they were referring to black people, they did have a clause in it called the 3/5 compromise or the 3/5 clause. Now, since the South had a lot more plantations, they had more slaves in total than the North had. Now, the thing is, when they were talking about how they were going to set it up, the Southern states wanted to count slaves in the population so that they have higher representation. But at the same time, they didn't want to have extra taxes from that population because they didn't consider them humans. And even though they still wanted to use the population for representation, of course, black people would not be represented in any of that. Now, the North, who a lot of people claim was so benevolent and where all of these abolitionists were, but the North was against that, saying that, well, slaves are nothing but property, no more than cattle, and should not be counted in the population, therefore should not be represented in the vote as far as how many representatives that state has. And the truth is, you know, way before the Civil War, the South was ready to succeed from the Union before the Union was even official. But eventually they did end up coming up with a compromise, which was the 3/5 compromise.
And now we can get ready for the 3/5 compromise. Because in order to determine a state's representation for the House of Reps, we need to know their population. So the Constitution sets that every 10 years we do what's called a census. And we're like, 1, 2, 3, there are 100,000 people in Alabama. And what that does is it does 2 things. Number one, that population number allows us to determine the direct taxes that state's going to pay. But more importantly, for our discussion of the 3/5 compromise, it determines the representation they get in the House of Representation. How many congressmen they are going to be able to send to Washington, D.C. to represent the interest of that state. And the controversy.
And see, this is the thing, because even now with the lesser of two evils, like, don't you see like how they run this game? They use black people back then. They didn't have to come to a black church or nothing like that, right? Or go to a barbecue or be like George Floyd there or something to get you to vote, right? They didn't have to do all of those things because you was just a slave population. Right. And they wanted to fight for control. So they realized, well, all the black people in this state now, well, hey, we got to count these in words in these states here. So they're going to go onto our stuff. So we get more tax money back because all of their issues and wars and stuff, like especially over, it's they're fighting over the economic value because you are worth so much money. They're not going to recognize it to this day because how much is going to be worth? It's going to be worth everything, right? It's like the the Neanderthal chick that said, you know, if you haven't done enough research, and she obviously is okay enough to make the video, so she should probably go read another book, right? So she can see all the stuff that they've done. right? Until she pushes herself to that point. But she should also push that message on to other ones, right? Because this is the thing, right? And it's 12 million of us, right? So if 700, it takes 3 of you to equal one kidnap, because you kidnap, rape, torture, you know what I'm saying? All of the other, it's 3. You're gonna have it's at least 3 or 4 crimes on each person. So it's gonna take at least 3 or 4 of you, right? So it's the 1/3 compromise we're gonna have to do. So if that's the price that you want to pay, if that's what you want to do, right? Or y'all can work perpetually. I don't know. I vote for the first because you know,
Controversy occurs not between
we
small
see how
and
they
large
do their
states,
rebellions. We see
southern
how violent
states
they are.
and northern states, and specifically on how do we count slaves. And the South wants it 2 ways. Number one, when it comes to counting slaves, they don't want to count them when it comes to direct taxes. They want to make sure that they are treated as property then, because the more population have, the more the direct taxes you're going to pay, and that's going to hurt them. But when it comes to representation, suddenly the South's like, slaves are people. Slaves are people. Because the more
That wasn't saying that was
more
people.
power you get, and the more power you get in Congress. And the North is like, hell no, slaves don't count. Slaves don't count, because the more slaves, the more power, and we don't have any slaves. So at the end of the day, the fraction that you get, and I'm getting nauseous
They
as
would have definitely had slaves.
is the 3/5 fraction compromise. For every 5 slaves, when we do the census, we're going to count like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 3. 6, 7, 8, 9, 6. For every 5 slaves, you get 3 people. And those people can be counted for your census, your population, and you can get representation off them. So the ironic part of this is that the South is going to get representation from their slaves so they can send that representation to Congress in order to keep their slaves slaves. Now, if we never had the 3/5 compromise, there's a good chance that a lot of American history.
So they wanted to use you and your population so that they can get in today, so that they can keep you voting the same way for the next 200. Now, I'm okay, my bad. I'm in the wrong era. So that they can keep their slaves. You know what I'm saying? Wow.
Would be different. Thomas Jefferson probably wouldn't have won the election of 1800. The Indian Removal Act probably would not have happened. Andrew Jackson would not have been able to veto the National Bank. We probably would not have had our compromises that pushed the Civil War off for another 50 or 60 years. So the 3/5 compromise is pretty darn important when it comes to understanding not only the Constitution and the Convention and compromise, but also really, I believe, sectionalism and the Civil War.
So in reality, what the 3/5 clause is saying is that for every 5 black people, right, that's equivalent to 3 white people, right? So it would take 5 black people to do something that would be equal to 3 white people doing it. Essentially saying the labor of 5 black people is the equivalent of 3 white people working. So you know how they say, well, you know, you got to work twice as hard to be good as them. You know, that's not true. They still see you the same way anyway, right? Not as good as them. Now, there was another clause in the Constitution that forbid this federal government from outlawing slavery for at least. All right. 3/5 compromise. Now, it is important that we talk about it, but I'm pretty sure y'all understand. This is a Neanderthal because y'all might not
we are
believe
giving
me.
states a certain amount of political power based on the number of people they have in their states. And there's only one problem with that, and that is the idea of slavery. You see, there were tons and tons, tremendous numbers of slaves in the South, and yet there were not that many in the North. And so the South thought, well, great, then we're going to benefit tremendously from having all these slaves here because we're going to get a lot of representatives in the House of Representatives. And the North said, that's not really fair. And so the compromise that is generally.
Wait. The North, the good old North, where the good ones were, was like, hold on, we can't count them as no people. The hell? They ain't be like, hey, let's free them and let them decide for themselves. They could have said that, but they was like, no, they ain't people. Anyway.
Is what's known as the 3/5 compromise, where both sides agree that they're going to count slaves as 3/5 of one human being for the purposes of assigning representation only. This keeps the South happy because then it gives them some representation for their slaves, and it keeps the North happy because that representation is not as much as if it would be if they were counted as one whole human being. It is gross in terms of the human condition, but it does keep the Union together for now. You can find out more at apwithmrg.com.
No, don't go find out nothing from him, y'all. I got you.
We're just voting.
Let's see.
What do you get when you have this? Compromise is a dirty word. It's a dirty word.
Compromise. Let me run that back, Neanderthal boy, because we be like, no, you gotta explain yourself, and then people will learn to compromise and love and stuff like that. We need the damn education, Neanderthal boy. Say it again.
Compromise. Compromise is a dirty word. It's a dirty word because it does not mean to reach a mutual agreement. My question to you is this: what do you get when you have a compromise and when you offer representation without the power to vote? You get the 3/5 compromise. The 3/5 compromise was a racist system meant to only benefit a slave-holding elite whose legacy still haunts us till this day. And in this video, we are going to explore the 3/5 compromise. Hear the word 3/5 compromise, you might reminisce in middle school when your teacher said, oh yes, the 3/5 compromise was when the slave states gave representation to enslaved people at 3/5 of a vote. Yeah, but it goes so much deeper than that, because whoever says vote says representation, and whoever says representation says by default electoral college, and who says electoral college says fraud. So
see, now I realized this even before, like, right when I was and listen, I didn't vote for Obama the first time, and I probably should have for the culture, right? Just for just because, right? But I wouldn't have done it the second time. But I didn't do it the first time either, right? But I noticed something with that, right? Because I realized this whole electoral college thing, right? So like a state gets the vote, like, so your state has to win. You don't vote individually, right? That's a popular vote, right? Your state votes for a particular candidate, and then whoever the state wins in that state, they gets all of these electoral votes, right? Which goes based on the population. Right. But then I was seeing also, and this was like when I first started on here and I was talking about this, right? Like over 10 some years ago, right? Because I was noticing, like, and this is when I learned about it. I didn't know it was a word for it. Um, but they would be like, oh, well, we're shipping prisoners from Florida to Ohio or to Florida or whatever. And I noticed that it was usually what they would call a red state, and I get it, it's no lesser of two evils, but like they would do that to influence how much like the electoral vote that they get within the election, right? So now if you ship like 5,000 prisoners from Florida to Ohio, now that state gets so and so representation, right? So like when you do the electoral college, that state now that you have 5,000 more people that cannot vote because they're in prison, right? That let alone the felons and stuff, but we just talking about the prisoners. Now you have some kind of influence on that, and then I was like, damn, this is crooked as hell. Like, why? There ain't no lesser of two evils. Like, what the hell? And they all do this, right? Even now when they talking about vote for this, the political lines, vote yes for such and such, because Trump is trying to. The Democrats also do that. They redraw the districts all the time to give themselves a certain favor, right? Now they use the in your face blatant stuff, like it's like good cop and bad cop, you know what I'm saying? And like the poor white dumb Neanderthals, like talking about MAGA, they're stuck on the Republican plantation, right? Like with Shay's Rebellion, because they've been shitting on them since the beginning too. right? But they didn't need nobody to convince them that the poor is white is better, because that's a Neanderthalic behavior. You feel what I'm saying? So if the majority of them didn't feel the way did, then the stuff that happened wouldn't have happened.
The Three-Fifth Compromise happened in 1787. It was an agreement at the U.S. Constitutional Convention that counted 3 out of every 5 enslaved people's votes. But they counted that towards representation, but without really allowing them the power to vote. You see what I mean? And so we have a very racist system, because the southern states had way more representation and representatives, but they had nobody voting to these representatives. So, of course, these representatives were just voting towards a white slaveholding elite. And that's why it's important to study history, because the legacy of the Three-Fifth Compromise still haunts us till this day. Here is a quote. During a debate of the 12th Amendment to the Constitution in 1803, Representative Samuel Thatcher of Massachusetts pointed out that counting enslaved persons under the compromise added an additional 13 members from slave states to the House and 18 additional electors in the.
So when we talk about this limiting slaves, because see, they're in a fight for this country now. Some of them, like Benjamin Franklin. Now his idea was like, why increase the sons of Africa in this country? He saw the Negro problem incoming. He was like, yo, we need to stop kidnapping them. But the problem was, everybody else realized, like, yo, we have a savage culture, we'll never make it without them, we need them, so we have to continue this slave trade, right? And we have to get black people working for us, because if we try to do it and we get boils on our skin, there was no sunscreen, so they could not do it, right? And they all understood, but he understood that we would be at where we are today, so he wanted to be, and for some reason they was always down with the Indians. They was like, let's hook up with the Indians, and we don't need them. Because he wanted to, I guess, have sex with Pocahontas that was talking before. But anyway, yeah. So
Electoral College. And these electors, of course, were not voting towards the best interest of the people. They were actually voting to enact more racist laws to benefit the slave system. And
like
this is why it's really important, because in America, we like to make laws and never change the system. What I mean by this is this. In America, we did the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and we said, okay, the Three-Fifth Compromise is over. Now, formerly enslaved people will have their representation.
By the way, where does it say that the Three-Fifths Compromise is not in effect? In fact, even as Malcolm X pointed out, if you were a citizen, why would a citizen have to go for a civil rights bill in the first place? And the fact that you fight me to be like, hey, they're going to take away the civil rights bill, means that deep down that it's something that's not preventing you from being this. So where was this dress guy? Where was this Three-Fifths? Show me where it's overturned, please.
But they still couldn't vote. And then with the 15th Amendment, now the slave states gave formerly enslaved people 100% of their representation, and yet still did not allow formerly enslaved people the power to vote because of very strict local Jim Crow laws. So do you see the issue? Now, back then, during the Three-Fifth Compromise, 60% of enslaved people had their representation but could not vote. And now, after all these amendments, 100% of formerly enslaved people's votes mattered, but they had no voting power.
False.
And then we arrive.
100% did not, because we know black women could not vote, and we also know that they had laws specifically made where they had the grandfather, because they was dumb as hell and they couldn't read, and black people could actually read, so they just had to pass other laws like grandfather laws so that the dumbass white people could vote. And they would ask black people like, yeah, how many jelly beans in this jar? And if you miss it by one, you can't vote type stuff, you know?
At some sense that is disingenuous, which is called legal liberalism. Legal liberalism has been a flaw in the US. Legal liberalism is viewing law as something that is individual. Something that is individual, that is resolved through primarily legal, constitution, or judicial means. Now, the biggest issue with legal liberalism is that it does not change the system. It only regards the individual for the law. And that is why the 3/5 compromise, that disgusting, vile compromise, still haunts us till this day. And author Tom Hartman even goes just as far as to
All right. And let me see here.
Israel and the US voting against the resolution.
The United States, as well as Europe and the UK, who abstain from voting, essentially are all the primary beneficiaries of the transatlantic slave trade. So, of course, none of them want to pay any damages for any of that. But another reason that the US government is motivated to vote against a resolution like this is that slavery is still legal in the United States. Read the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery.
Now, I've only been telling you this for a long time, but here's a white boy to tell you so you'll believe it.
13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. Robin
Now, they didn't tell you who get to write the laws, who get to enforce the laws, who get to enforce the punishments, right? If that would be fairly punished, each person would be fairly punished. But the part that everybody focus on is the accept part, right? Because that is important to point out, right? But it says involuntary servitude, right? So if I just make your rent high as hell, I make gas high as hell, I make this high as hell, and then you got to go to sleep at at fucking 9 o'clock at night to get up in the morning to come work for me to make me some goddamn money, right? You're volunteering, right? It's just so you can go watch Netflix when you get home, right? Or we're bored with our time, and even when we have time, we don't know what to do with it, right? So we spend our money or give it away, right? Instead of investing it in something or investing it in ourselves, we trick it up. You know what I'm saying? We buy food, we go shopping, we go do this, we go do that, we find we like and I ain't saying I ain't guilty of stuff either, you know what I'm saying? But
McDowell and Margie Mason at AP News released this article that is an incredible piece of reporting about how the state of Alabama specifically has historically been one of the worst offenders for profiting off of inmate labor. I really recommend you go read the article, but it speaks about how Alabama has this program where it leases its inmates to around over 500 local businesses where they have to work or face some sort of punishment. And despite being paid minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, the state takes 40% off the top of that gross wage. If inmates get like a warning from their boss, they can face punishment back in prison. This has made Alabama hundreds of millions of dollars. As the article notes, in 2022, Alabama actually removed the incarceration exception from its state constitution anti-slavery amendment. Now, the crazy part is
what up, Tom?
majority states have not removed this incarceration exception from their state constitutions. And of course, in the federal constitution, this exception still exists. In many states, still, inmate labor is not only required, it is completely unpaid. Now, does it make sense why the United States would vote no against this resolution? And would it surprise you to learn that despite having only 4% of the Earth's population, the United States holds 20%, 1/5 of the Earth's incarcerated population. And what it's
I'm telling you, less than 10% of the global population, over 90% of the crimes against humanity. And y'all trying, well, what about this? They don't even follow their own laws. They make laws for you to follow so that they can lock you back up to have you working on the chain gang. You know what I'm saying? Oh, my bad. This is the wrong error.
surprise you to learn as well that despite making up only 15% of the United States population, Black Americans represent 40%, 2/5 of our incarcerated population. I'll let you connect the dots.
And I'll add nonviolent drug offenses to that, right? So, and the thing is, what is prison gerrymandering? Right? It's the practice of counting incarceration. It's the 3/5 compromise today. That's what it's. That's what it is. I didn't know that's what the name of it was. Gerrymandering. All right. So the practice of counting incarcerated people as residents of the prison's location rather than the home address during the redistricting, inflating the political power of the district with the prisons, right? So these private prisons, right? They ship prisoners back and forth to each other, right? The in the same within the same company, but different states, right? Just so a particular state could get more influence within an election, right? Or a modern day 3/5 kind of compromise thing. You know what I'm saying? Because like one state that I remember was doing it was Ohio, doing like like 2020 or like 2016 or something like that. Like I was like noticing like yeah, like 50,000 prisoners shipped to from like Florida to or somewhere to Ohio, which you know, but yeah, that's how they use these prison populations, right? So they not only use them for free labor, they do this too, right? So incarcerated people who cannot vote inflate the population count, giving residents in the prison districts disproportionate representation in Congress, state legislature, and city councils. And a lot of them be them little redneck towns out in buttfuck Egypt or who knows where Egypt, my bad. Because most inmates are from urban areas but housed in rural areas, it transfers political clout from black urban, they said black and brown, to white ones, right? So, yeah, man. This thing is not new or nothing
How
like that.
prison-based gerrymandering changes
The
district
modern
lines.
3/5 compromise, you know.
This is New York State Assembly District 114 as it was drawn after the 2000 census. Because District 114 is located in the corner of the state, it is one of the clearest examples to show how prison-based gerrymandering changes district lines. The district was supposed to contain about 126,000 people, and according to the census figures, it does. But the district only meets its required population count by claiming more than 9,000 people incarcerated in prisons as residents of the district. Without using prisoners as padding, the district would need to add 9,000 more residents to meet population requirements. But where can the district find more people? We know that the district can't invade Canada and can't annex Vermont, so the district can't expand to the north or east. Also, districts need to be contiguous, and New York State avoids making districts that split county lines. Therefore, this district can only expand in one direction and must include these two towns. This would cause a dramatic wave of line changes across the state, changing every district in the state. As you can see, prisons have a big effect on how districts are drawn.
And listen, there ain't no lesser of two evils. They all do the same thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, uh, to give themselves power, right? The one thing, if you look at history, the white liberals try to put themselves in power and be like, hey, I'm going to use the sympathy of the black vote or the black fight or whatever it may be to get them to put me into power, right? And they're all down with this gerrymander. That's why, and now that I'm thinking about it, in 2016 they probably did it because I don't know if it was a red state or blue state by their definition, but places like California does the same thing, right? So to increase their chances of winning the next election.
And many prison gerrymandering is the practice of counting incarcerated people in the area where their prison resides rather than their hometowns. And many people across the state say it's being used maliciously. Daniel Jones was only 20 years old when he went to prison.
In 2000, I was incarcerated at the Michigan Reformatory in Ionia County, and I'm originally from Wayne County. So while there, a corrections officer made a round and passed out a census form to everybody on the cell block. And as I began to fill it out, I heard a person yell out from inside of their cell that, we shouldn't be filling this out because we're not residents here in Ionia. They're trying to count us as residents so they can receive more funding and benefits. So I threw it away.
That was how Jones first found out what prison gerrymandering was. Now he's the outreach and engagement coordinator for the Michigan Collaborative to end mass incarceration.
After a person has served 20 or 30 years, after 2 or 3 different censuses have been taken and the population has just diminished, that area will not receive the funding and the opportunities that it needs for when people are returning home.
Jones.
So a lot of the population that's in black areas that deprive them of the funding that we need to have community centers and libraries and schools and all of that stuff. Because I was like, yo, in my district, right, I'm in a city, right, Richmond Public Schools, and they have schools with like 90-something% black students and schools with 90-something% white students in this integrated area. So you got a couple black students there and a couple white students here. But I'm like, yo, why are they giving like Carver with like all the white students the good books and the good stuff, and places like Henrico County, they got computers and everything, and we got outdated books in my school, and they even do it by certain district. Like I'm in District 5 of the city, you know what I'm saying? And when they used the jail and to put it in certain areas and stuff like that, so that children in white schools can actually get the benefit of the black incarcerated population, you know what I'm saying? And they get the funding on top of that, right? So they use it in every aspect, in every way. They use us.
Says there are nearly 35,000 inmates in Michigan. Those prisoners still want to feel like they're a part of their own communities. That's why his goal is to educate people about prison gerrymandering and stop the practice he deems unfair to minorities.
I think it's very important, right, to have as much, of a voice as possible in your home community.
Tracy Brame is a lawyer from WMU Cooley Law School and says prison gerrymandering makes it hard for prisoners to have equal representation.
When the census began years ago, it didn't make as big of a difference because you're just really counting people in the state, right? It didn't really matter where you live. But statewide, we still count them, kind of where they're housed.
Brame says if you're in prison when the census is conducted, you'll be representing an area you're not from.
Considering that many of our prisons are in rural kind of outlying areas in Michigan that tend to be more Republican, tend to be more red, it's often the white rural communities that are benefiting from being able to count those prisoners for purposes of representation.
Yeah, we look at it as red and blue instead of black and white. And that's why we have been enslaved for
you in Lansing, Samana Sheik, 6 News.
4 times in the last 1,000 years. So yeah, I mean, tell me what's the difference between that and the 3/5 compromise, please. You know what I'm saying? If they have changed things, if things are different now off of the books or whatever, please tell me what
We
is.
talk a lot on this show about democracy. We talk about voter suppression. We've talked about gerrymandering. But this particular angle on all of that, what I'm about to talk about, well, it's a real doozy. Have you heard of prison gerrymandering? Yes, prison gerrymandering. It's a real thing. And here's how it works. The Census Bureau policy in this country is to count people as residing wherever that person lives and sleeps.
By the way, we haven't got there yet, but the Census Act of 1790, which we'll probably get to on the next time I do a history thing, right? Um, it tells you what the concept of resident, and of course, like it makes you, a citizen can only be white, right? On this act here, the Census Act of 1790, which we'll go into, right? Because we see how all of this plays out. But like he said, they give you their definition of what a residence is, right? And you know how they was rolling with the 3/5 compromise. Like, all right, this is how we're gonna do it, right? And we're gonna count it as where they sleep at. Like, we know that they anyway.
Count people as residing wherever that person lives and sleeps most of the time. It's known as their usual residence. For millions of inmates across the US, that means the address of the state or federal prison facility where they're located is listed as their primary address, regardless of where they came from. So when the census comes around, what ends up happening is instead of prisoners being counted in their home districts, they're counted in the mainly small, mainly white rural towns where the prison facility that they're in is located, and where they also, of course, have no vote. And it has a devastating effect on their actual home district, reducing the supposed populations there, while artificially boosting the population in these prison towns. One redistricting expert in Connecticut calculated that 9 of the 151 state house districts that were able to meet their required minimum population solely because of prisons within their borders. And 8 of those 9 districts were, wait for it, predominantly white. According to that expert, if the state stopped counting prisoners where they are locked up, 22 districts.
That's why the Democrats in there vote yes for such and such, so they can prison gerrymander you. Well, you ain't in prison, but they're gonna gerrymander your humpies. But never mind. We got like 120 years left to vote blue, like vote Democrat. Like LBJ said, we got another 120, 130 years left. So never mind.
Districts would need to be redrawn. Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont signed a law ending prison gerrymandering in the state earlier this year, but it's not just happening there. In Juneau County, Wisconsin, prisoners account for a stunning 80% of the entire population of one district. 80%. And in Rhode Island, prisoners in one house district account for nearly 16% of the population, even though only 4% of them are actually from that district. Rhode Island is now debating whether to end prison gerrymandering, as they should. No sane person thinks prison is where these people live. It's where they are being held for a crime that they may or may not have committed. I mean, which prisoner would describe their 3 hots and a cot as their home? It's ridiculous and it's racist. Let's not forget that in the US, Black and brown Americans make up a disproportionate number of prisoners. In 2019, 56% of the United States' prison population was Black or Latino, despite these groups making up only 32% of the overall population of America. Think about how discriminatory prison gerrymandering is. It beggars belief. A white rural town can have a prison filled with Black and brown people. They can then legally bolster their own electoral power, saying, we've got all these residents, but those residents can't vote. These white...
What is this? 1790. And tell me, what is the difference between that and the 3/5 compromise? You tell me. Like, how is what they are doing today not what they've always done? How is that not the same thing? Right? And then when we look at these elections, right? I didn't vote at all, right? But the fact that my state voted blue in this last one means I voted for Kamala Harris. You know what I'm saying? Now, I wouldn't have went down there to contribute to that nonsense, right? But y'all can stop being mad at me now because my state won it. So it doesn't matter what happens. Like, we speak, like all the rednecks and all that stuff spoke for my damn vote anyway, right? And all the Negroes in my district who is spooked out, they spoke for me anyway, because that's how they rock it. Now, certain things, right? Like if they want to have a casino, in your city or whatever, and they do an individual vote, or if they want to fix a pothole in your city, that's something different. But we talking about a system that is naturally rigged and rigged on top of being rigged, and is all rigged to destroy you, to be built off of you. And it has created you to be like, we have to save this very thing. It's
Rural
crazy.
towns are basically inflating their own power and influence by using the presence of non-voting black men behind bars. It's outrageous to even say it out loud. So what's the solution to prison gerrymandering? Back with us to discuss is Christina Greer.
All right. Y'all can leave that in the comments, you know. And you know what, man? I have more, but we're going to actually stop here. I'll go on to the rest 20 next years time. until 1808.
Even though
All
the
right. Yeah, we'll go on to this part next time, right? Because this is the slave trade compromise, right? A compromise on the slave trade. This is Neanderthal behavior. Like, what kind of nonsense? And the Northwest Ordinance and stuff like that. We'll keep going with that. And also, and we'll talk about this probably Wednesday with Cassidra, the disturbed China is like, what's going on with you Negroes arresting our people, stealing our stuff? That's why we sent them there. But I guess to wrap it up, I'll play some of this. I ain't listened to this whole thing, so I'll just play it because this is the last thing, and we'll get out of
Welcome
here.
back to What If History, where we explore the paths not taken. Today we are diving deep into perhaps the single most agonizing and, well, consequential moment in American history, the founding in 1787. You have shared sources that really paint a vivid picture of the Philadelphia Convention, that oppressive summer heat, the political exhaustion, and this.
I mean, the Articles of Confederation had failed, spectacularly failed, really. They were too weak to manage trade, raise revenue, guarantee internal peace.
Is not working.
Not at all. Every delegate there knew they were working on borrowed time. The core mission was survival, creating a functional government, something capable of binding these really disparate geographic and economic interests into, a unified whole.
But stitching that union together required a terrible moral compromise, didn't it? We know that beneath all the arguments about federal power, representation, tariffs, the massive elephant in the room was chattel slavery.
Absolutely. It was the source of immense generational wealth for the Southern delegates. And yet, it stood as this glaring antithesis to the stated ideals of liberty and equality that the new nation was supposed to champion. Just a fundamental contradiction.
And in our history, our reality, the founders chose unity. Unity above all else, it seems. They prioritized the geographic inclusion of all 13 states, even if it meant deferring that moral reckoning.
They essentially built a flaw, a structural flaw, right into the constitutional bedrock. Accepting the 3/5 compromise, the Fugitive Slave Clause, protecting the international slave trade until 1808.
They kicked the moral can down the road, creating this enormous accumulating debt, a debt that our timeline paid off in the most catastrophic way possible.
Yeah.
The Civil War.
600,000 dead.
And then the
600,000. Damn, so y'all got what? At least 11.8 or 9 to if y'all want to pay it off that way. She only said, "Oh, I thought it was 7." So y'all shortchanging us, like, so we might have to add tax on that, and then we gotta add, So y'all did a whole bunch of crimes and kidnappings and all that stuff. So for every 3, and it was children a lot of times too. So it was 3 for every one, because it was, they would have lived 3 times longer because of superior genetics. So for 3 of them, it would equal 1. So it's like 36 million more to go. 35.8 million more. I don't know. Y'all send a math expert over here.
Subsequent century of systemic oppression that followed. But our mission today is to explore the alternate path. What if a powerful, maybe unlikely coalition, driven by both moral fervor and a keen understanding of economic pragmatism, had forced the issue right then and there?
What if they had demanded a constitution that banned the continuation of slavery from the moment of its ratification?
Exactly.
We're tracking the life of an alternate America, born smaller, certainly born fractured, but maybe one that could perhaps truly claim its ideals as self-evident from day one?
So, to guide you through this really complex timeline, we've structured this deep dive into 3 series.
Let's unpack that moment. The moment the compromise shattered the union. Corrosive about his argument.
All right, blah blah blah, because that did not happen. You know what I'm saying? If was a split. What if the first brother that was on the shores of Africa had smacked the white boy and told him to go about his business? We would not be here today, but we are. So it is what it is, and we'll continue on with history, and we'll be back Wednesday. With Cassidra. Shouts out to Cassidra, um, over there in, as they would say, the motherland. Um, the mother and fatherland. Shouts out to my brother Tom that works. Shouts out to Matron in the building. Make sure y'all subscribe to Matron. Shouts out to my brother Koku who had the live yesterday. Shoot the breeze every Saturday. So make sure y'all check that brother out. Shouts out to everybody in the building. Karma 804, Erica Howard. I don't know who else. Everybody else. Shouts out to all of y'all. I don't really have no last words, so I'll just let this be the last words. I don't even know if it's gonna work. Shouts out to my brother in the building. Appreciate you listening, my brother. Um, so yeah, I don't really have no last words, so let this be the last words.
Do you know what? That's a revolutionary statement, you know that. A lot of people don't recognize that. They think they're non-revolutionary, you know. They think revolutionaries are people who want to shoot and fight. And so now we just wanted everybody to be the same. Do you know what you're saying? Do you know the tremendous amount of transference of wealth that must take place for black folk to be equal with white folk? Yeah. The tremendous control over resources, the tremendous ownership of real estate in this country, the real ownership of the means of production. Are you really talking about equality? You can't be. And so if you start to realize what you're saying when you say that you just want to be equal and you want all people to be the same, you'd realize that you are a revolutionary and you're making a revolutionary statement. Because for black people to be equal in this country will call for a major reconstruction and a major reorganization of this nation. You have to understand that. You know, in New York, they're asking blacks who are fighting the Jews in Crown Heights, how are we going to reduce racial tension? You know, and they keep pushing them, and I wish they would ask me that. I'm not here to reduce racial tension. I'm here to increase it. I bring not peace, but what? A sword. Because
That's right. Ain't no because. Right? We see because, you know what I'm saying? Because the 1/3 compromise, right? Now we are priceless, but we're gonna be like 1/3 you're gonna have to pay. You know what I'm saying? So shouts out to all y'all in the building. I can't see nobody who be in here, but I'd be surprised. So shouts out to all of y'all who was in here. Much love to all of y'all. And as always, man, we have got to start standing for something, or we're gonna keep falling for anything.